Hello YouTubers, thank you for watching my movie. Today I'm going to be showing you how to build a computer using parts that you might find lying around your house. Well, maybe not around your house, but I definitely have these parts lying around my house. So, first thing you're going to need is to decide what kind of computer you want. In this case, we're going to be building a gaming computer. So, first thing you want to do is figure out what size case you want. This is a mid-tower. It's about the size that most computers usually are. And in this particular computer, we have most of the parts already pre-assembled, such as the hard drive, the power supply, and the CD drive are all inside this case already. As you can see, all these wires are coming out from the power supply, and we have the SATA wires from the CD drive and the hard drive already placed. The main component of the computer is going to be your motherboard. So that's pretty much what you're going to be putting into the computer, and everything else just goes right along inside it. So today we have an Asus motherboard, a P8Z77-V LK. So this is the type of motherboard that's good for overclocking. So if you're an overclocker, mostly for gamers, this is a perfect board to use. The processor we're going to be putting in today is the Intel i5. This is an unlocked processor. So this is the 3570K in an 1155 socket. These are the two main components you're going to be using, and together the processor and the motherboard will be the main controls of the computer. Generally, the processor comes with its own cooling fan, but being that this is a gaming computer, this person wants to go a little bit more over the top and use the Corsair H55 water cooling system. So this is going to allow you to get the maximum temperatures out of your overclock. So for those of you wondering what exactly is overclocking, basically it's giving more electricity to the processor so that your computer can run faster. This is especially useful when playing games or doing graphic animation, and it makes your computer run a bit faster. It gives it a bit more speed. When you're doing that, it'll actually make the processor run hotter. So that's why we need to keep it cool using this kind of heatsink. So, first thing we're going to do is take a look at this motherboard. So you notice when you open the motherboard, it's in this plastic bag. This plastic bag actually serves a purpose in that this is an electrostatic discharge bag. It keeps the motherboard from getting electrified and burning out the circuits and capacitors. So here we get a better look at the motherboard. As you can see, it's got 4 memory slots, and it's got 1 PCI Express slot and 1 PCI Express X8 slot. So you'll be able to put 2 video cards in there and SLI or crossfire them depending on if you get NVIDIA or ATI. When you put the motherboard in, you have to be careful to discharge your electricity. So if you're sitting, especially if you're sitting on a carpeted surface, you want to touch the outside of the tower to discharge any static electricity you might have. Now, with that being done, you're going to want to orient the motherboard so that it can slide right into the case. When you have it oriented correctly, you'll be able to slide it so that it intersects with the back piece, as you can see right here. So we were about to attach the motherboard. First thing you want to do when you're attaching the motherboard is to verify that the back plate is correct and the orientation of it. So you want to make sure when you put it in that it slides over all the components well, especially if you're buying a used part, because sometimes they send the wrong back plate. So you want to install that. Just pop it right into the little hole right there. and you should hear it snap as you pop it in. It's a pretty standard hole, so it should fit no matter what kind of case you get. So now that we have the motherboard plate in, we should be able to slide the motherboard right into place. Before you slide in the motherboard though, you want to make sure that your cooling supply doesn't require the motherboard to be out. Some cooling supplies will snap right in on the top, and some you have to have a bracket on the back. If you have the motherboard screwed in and in place, and you have the bracket on the back, you're going to have to take it back out and redo it. So you want to take a look at your cooling supply, which is right over here. Alright, the next thing we're going to want to do is put in our processor. Our processor is going to come in this little box right here. Pull that bad boy out. And we have our stock cooling fan and of course our processor. Processor comes in its own little plastic casing. Now, one of the great things about Intel processors is that they don't have pins on the back for you to bend. Now, when handling a processor, you're going to want to handle it from the sides, and you're going to want to make sure your hands are free of grease so that you don't get anything all over the processor. If you look real close at the processor, you'll see the words that denote the model number and the serial number of the processor. Put it in, you open up the lever on the side, pull out the safety plastic, and you pop it right in. It only fits in one direction, so make sure you line up your arrows, and it goes right in. This is important. You don't want to force the processor to go in ever. So if it doesn't fit right the first time, then you're doing something wrong. If you feel like you have to put any excess pressure, you might be doing something wrong, and you better leave this to a professional if you don't know what you're doing. Now that we have the processor in, we can begin our heatsink assembly by putting our retaining ring, which is this, and affixing that to our back plate. Turn it around. With the screws through the screw holes, we can put in our back plate. Now, you wouldn't be able to see it from where you are, but on the back of the back plate it actually tells you where exactly everything's going to have to go. So just pay attention to what your processor socket size is, and you'll see where you're supposed to put everything. It's going to line up perfectly. Just remember, in this especially in this part of the process, if you have to force anything, you're going to have a bad time. Now we can install our motherboard, since the back plate and the retaining ring are in. For that, you're just going to slide the motherboard right on in. And make sure it's lined up with your back plate. Sometimes you have to move it around to make sure everything's going in at the right spot on all angles. It's critical to remember. If you're going to have to force something in, you're probably doing it wrong. So just make sure every step of the way that everything slides into place as tightly as it should. Now at this point you can probably screw in your motherboard, but I prefer to leave it screwed in until closer to the end when I can make sure that I don't have to take it out to slide around any parts or connect any wires. Now the next part for this cooling fan, we're going to take out the fan in the back and install the radiator, which has its own fan. So you're going to want the airflow to go inside the case. So you'll be able to tell which way the airflow is by the arrow on the cooling fan itself. So it'll show you on the side. In this case, we want to install it this way so that the airflow goes into the case from the outside. This will allow the adequate cooling that we need to make sure that everything cools properly. Alright, we have the old fan out. And we can now attach the new fan to the radiator. Alright, now that we have the radiator in, we can focus more on what's going on inside the case. Okay, so now we have our motherboard in and our retaining clip in place. So our next step is going to be to put our heatsink right on there. As you can see, this one comes with the thermal paste pre-assembled. So we can take the plastic covering and this piece is going to slide right in. You're going to want to make sure it butts right up against the processor. Give it a nice little turn. And you can tighten the screws to get it right in there. So you're going to want to do this in a star pattern, which means you go from one to diagonal to the next to the next. Pause it. Now with our processor and heatsink firmly in place, you're going to want to take the power wire that goes from here and you're going to find the fan, the CPU fan slot on your motherboard and pop that in there. Once that's in, this is your chassis fan, is going to be your main fan, and that goes right above. And of course, no particular order. And once again, it's very important that you don't bend any pins. So just gingerly put it in and make sure it's in the right spot. Now with your processor assembly in place and our water cooling system ready to go, you're going to put in the RAM next. The RAM is going to go in your memory slots. Just remember, you don't want to touch the yellow part of the memory, so you're going to be very careful with that. You can put your memory, it just snaps right in, and there's only one way to put it, so there's no wrong way to put in a memory, unless if you're touching the sides, then you're not going to have a good time. Make sure it snaps into place when you put it in. And make sure you have matched pairs of memory. That means in each slot, for example the two blue slots, we put this black memory in. The memory in black has a cooler around it to keep everything cool. Notice the emphasis in a computer is to keep everything nice and cool. So as long as your CPU system is properly cooled, it'll last a lot longer and it'll prolong the lifetime of your computer. Alright, before we screw in the motherboard, the last thing we want to do is put on the case controls. So we have the power switch, the reset switch, and the LED for the outside. What these are going to do is control the power and the reset buttons and the light that turns on when you press it. So these can be a bit tricky to put in. So I like to make sure I can move the motherboard around and take a look at it where it can go in. On the motherboard, you're going to see the corresponding acronyms for the LED, Power SW, and Reset SW. You're going to want to make sure that they're put in with the positive side corresponding with where the positive goes on the motherboard. This is going to change from motherboard to motherboard, so be careful and make sure that you're doing the right one. The ground is always going to be black, which is the negative. There's always a color, and when it's both the same color, then you're going to want to look on the plastic jumper itself, and that'll show you the arrow indicating which one the positive is, and the other one is always going to be the negative. So you want to put that into your motherboard. Careful when you pull it out not to bend it, otherwise you're going to have a really bad time. So our reset is going to go here. Thusly. Power. This here way. And the LED like that. The other part from your case that you're going to worry about is your speaker. This is what's going to, when you turn on the computer and it beeps, it's coming from the internal speaker. That would be this. So that plugs in on this particular one right above the other switches. So the reason we left this unscrewed is so we can move it around to get a better angle and make sure we're putting it in the right orientation. Finally, when that's through, all we have left to connect is our power supply. So we have our two from the power supply. They're going to go there, and our SATA connectors for the motherboard, for the CD drive, the hard drive, and the heat sensor. Alright, with everything else connected, the last thing we have to connect is our HD audio, which is going to go into the part marked HD audio. Pretty much from here on out, everything is going to be labeled as it should be, and it only fits where it's supposed to go. So you can pop the audio in. You can put in your USB controllers and your SATA wires. Now your SATA wire, you're going to want your hard drive to be the primary SATA wire. So that would be this guy, and it's going to go into SATA slot 1. Now in order to keep the integrity of the wire management, you want to try to make it so that every wire is clustered together and everything's all in one place. So you put your SATA wire, your hard drive goes in slot 0, and generally your CD drive goes in slot 1. And any other accessories can go as you please. As long as your hard drive is in slot 0, your computer is going to recognize everything else based on what it is. All these can be configured and set up in the BIOS on your motherboard. So once you have everything connected, you're pretty much good to go, and you can just turn her on and fire it up. So with that, folks, we have a computer. Pause it. Alright, next we're going to put in our video card. Our video card is a PCI Express video card. So that's going to go into your PCI Express slot, which is right here. Generally you want to use the PCI Express slot towards the top of the motherboard because that's the one where the most power is going to be distributed. The other one is generally a lower end express card. So for any reference, you want to use the one to the top, and you're usually going to have many wires set up at this point that you're going to have to work around. So now you're going to want to be careful to not bend any of the parts, but pretty much as long as you're not touching the piece on the bottom that goes into the motherboard, you're going to be okay. So generally when you put it in, you're going to have to remove a metal bracket. So in this one, it has the plastic non-screw system. So you can press it and it'll pop right out. The little metal bracket comes out as well. So when you have your slot designated for it, you're going to slide it in. Make sure everything's nice and even. And if you have it in the right slot, it'll just slide right in. So this particular graphics card takes up 2 of the slots on the back of the PC. So you're going to take out 2 of the metal pieces, and that will slide right into where it belongs. Push it in until you hear the snap, and then plug that into its corresponding power slot. Close up your plugs, and you have your video card in. So with that, all of our components are plugged up. Our power supply is plugged in 2 points on the motherboard. Our video supply is plugged in. Hard drive and CD drive are all plugged in. All your ports from your hard drive, your CD drive, and extra peripherals are plugged into the motherboard. Your case is plugged into the motherboard. Your USB and audio are also plugged into your motherboard. And of course your cooling supply is plugged in 2 spots for each component of the cooling supply. So there you have a fully built custom PC. I hope you learned a lot watching this video, and if you liked it, please press the like button and remember to subscribe. Thank you very much, interwebs. I will see you soon.